Hello and welcome to this short video I'm going to make about a track of mine called After the Rain. It's a very interesting track of mine, and I thought that it'd be good to talk about it because it's kind of got the biggest impact, I think, for many reasons which I'll go over as we go through the video. But originally I was asked to write some music for this part work, and there was a part where you collect lots of different sections and put it all together in a ring binder free with issue 1. And it was called Enhancing Your Mind, Body, Spirit, as you can see from this, and it came with a CD in it, and I was commissioned to write some music back in the early 2000s to go in this, some relaxation music, so that send people to sleep kind of music, and I'd never done anything quite like that before, but I'd done some instrumental music and I'd done sort of synthetic music, and some of my stuff was kind of in that frame of style anyway, but this album was quite an interesting task for me, to make specifically 1 hour of sleepy music, and so I had to write 6 tracks. There they are on the original CD again, and the very first one, called After the Rain, is a track which has come on to be kind of my most popular track that I've written. I don't know why. It may be because it's track 1 of the first album that was done. I don't know. Perhaps it has a certain quality to it that people like. But nowadays I get to see the number of views, listens, whatever, of particular tracks of music on Spotify and iTunes and so on. And this track, After the Rain, is by far the most listened to, whatever that means. When I say by far, it's kind of 10 times more than any of the other tracks. So I've got the list of all the other tracks, and they're sort of roughly this number of tracks listens. And then After the Rain is like 10 times more than any of the other ones, constantly. So I'm not quite sure why. Perhaps you could help me with that one. But I thought it'd be quite nice to do a little bit of analysis and history and story behind that track. Just simply because it's quite an interesting one to start with. I'm going to hopefully do other tracks as well, but this is my first one about particular tracks. So let's just talk about the history of this one. Okay, so the first thing that I did when I was commissioned to do the whole album was to go and listen to kind of similar types of music as you would do. So I listened to some sort of what we call new age music, sleeping, helping, relax music, kind of things like that. And I wrote down a list of things that are sort of properties that I thought that they would have. Certain types of sounds, soft sounds, generally, lots of flutes and strings and soft pianos. And also musically, pentatonic was a thing that came up quite a lot of pentatonic style of music. You don't get very much jarring sound and discords and things like that generally in this kind of music. So very simple harmonically and softish sounds. And another thing that interested me was this kind of idea of minimalism. Now, minimalism is something where not much happens in the music, a lot of stuff gets repetitive, and I've done a lot of that as a percussionist at the Guildhall in London. I've done a lot of this kind of minimalist playing, Steve Reich music and things like that. I've done it at school as well. I got quite into it as a style, and I quite liked the idea of repetition, not because it was easy to do, but because you can really pick up on subtle things in it, and small changes make a big difference. So the first piece that I started working on was in fact this piece. Might have been other ones, but this was one of the first ones that I did. And it was on an old Atari ST computer that I used, and its working title was Minimal 1, because you only had sort of 8 digits, I think, to type tracks in, times you couldn't name it anything you liked. So it was known as Minimal 1 was the working title for this piece. And it very much was this kind of minimalist feel, and it started with a little sort of contrapuntal couple of riffs between a couple of keyboard type parts. So the first one that starts the piece off, I recognise, is this kind of pentatonic idea, sort of in A minor, but it's not really, we'll come to that in a minute. It goes something like this. It goes a bit longer than that, I can't remember exactly what the notes were offhand, but it's an 8-bar phrase, kind of, or a slow 4-bar, if you want to think of the speed of it in semiquavers rather than quavers, but it's a 4-bar phrase then, let's call it, for the sake of argument. It's a 4-bar phrase which repeats throughout the entire track, so that just goes on a loop for the whole piece. So that's kind of definitely a minimalist idea, it goes around. There's then a second part that goes on top of that, which is played by a piano. I'll just play a little bit of that. Okay, so it goes something like this. remember exactly how it goes, but it's those kind of piano parts that go on through the part as well. Now this one, I just looked this up and I'll show you in a moment, on the Atari. I'm actually get it working. And it's actually a 9-bar phrase, that one. It goes much longer than I thought. I thought it was just a kind of another 4-bar phrase. It's actually a 9-bar phrase, which is kind of interesting because it means that the parts don't actually overlap the same the whole way through. That must have been an idea of mine when I did it. They didn't just exactly overlap the whole way through. They moved and shifted across, so you get a kind of a different part going against a different part every every 9 bars. It changes. So I thought that's quite an interesting thing. So it makes it slightly more interesting. Again, those parts kind of get lost in the mix of what's going on with the whole piece, but they are there the whole time. They just go through the whole piece. I think, if I recall rightly, they fade in and out throughout the piece a little bit. I bring them in and out just to make the tonal gradual changes a little bit different. My thinking behind this idea is that the brain kind of likes to latch onto something it can listen to over and over, because repetitiveness is kind of a state of hypnosis, if you like. And hypnosis is a good way to get yourself off to sleep. So by hypnotising yourself by listening to the same thing, a bit like a ticking clock might have been a hypnosis technique from years ago, this idea is that you begin to the brain focuses on something and just stays in the same state of focusing on it. That's the theory anyway. So the music doesn't move a great deal for that very reason. If I started to change completely keys and things like this, it wouldn't do that. So the whole piece stays very much in this pentatonic kind of feel to it, though not in A minor really, kind of a C major thing. So we get a definite C feel to it. And the final part, which sort of sticks out the most, is most obvious, is the the synthesized voice sound. This sort of sound, this synth pad, and it very much brings in the key of the piece. So the C major, definitely as soon as that comes in, you can feel the key of the piece. Because before it's a little bit ambiguous with the A minor, with that kind of A minor feel. But as soon as the part comes in, you get that droning C at the bass. And then the other parts begin to float in around it. So that very much fills in the whole piece and becomes almost like the melody. It's a very, very slow melody. It does move away from C major occasionally. We could climb up the scale a bit. Very simple and very much white note based, this piece. There's no black notes in this at all, no chromatic notes. A few dissonances, purely only things like the major 7th chords, and we go from this lovely A minor and then occasionally just slips down into the major 7th chord. But then always resolving back to a nice satisfying C major to keep finishing every phrase off. And it doesn't really fit into a kind of a time signature either, that part. There is this constant beat going on. That vocal ooh synth part just kind of changes when it feels like it. It doesn't really have a sense of pulse or how many beats there are in a bar or anything like that, which I think is kind of interesting. I haven't done that very often since. Maybe that's one of the secrets behind this piece. It doesn't have this kind of strict changing bar here, changing chord there. It just changes at some point during the music without a real thought about which bar line is where, and so on. So when you look at it musically, it's just all over the place. It's not in time or anything like that. Anyway, let me show you now the original Atari screenshot of what was going on that, because I have actually got it working. So have a quick look at that. Okay, so here's this screen of my old Atari that's still just about working. Here's the screenshot of what's going on there. You can see some of the parts lined up. These stars means these parts are muted, so these are things that I put in and then moved around a different pattern to play. So you can see here that the warm mallet sound that we know is still there, and the piano sound that you can hear is still there. But there's these other parts that have been muted. This is a very busy glockenspiel part, which I took out. It's flying around the space, tinkling away on the top too much. A drum part, which appears to be some sort of funky groove rhythm, which I took out. A vibraphone part, which you can actually hear on the early mix when we get to hear that, and another piano part, which actually this is the electric piano part, which got moved onto a different pattern. If we look at the way this works here, so pattern 1 we're looking at now plays the whole way through, and then pattern 3 here comes through, and pattern 3 looks like this. This has now the separate voice part, the synthesized vocal parts the piano part, electric piano part, that sort of mumbles around in the background, and the string pad, which sort of sustains throughout the whole piece once it comes in as well. It doesn't do a lot, that just sort of holds a sound together. So yeah, so there's what they look like with these parts. Okay, and for the absolute geek out, just to show you the modules that we used to create some of the sounds. So the warm mallet sound and the bass drum and clave sound were from this Proteus 1 Plus orchestral module, showing its age now, but still working well. And then the piano sound, I believe, was from this Proteus 2000 module that I literally just got delivered, I think. I just threw it in at the last minute to the piano sound. And the Vox, the sort of cooed Vox sound as it's called, is from this little module called the Nano Piano. A few little sounds on that. And the synth pad, I think the strings that you hear are from this module called the Yamaha TG300. Did the strings. So they're a complete geek out for those who want to know exactly which module was playing which sounds. Okay, so here I've got a recording of the one of the original mixes that I made of this piece. Now, unfortunately, being in the early 2000s, the technology for CDs and CDRs, making your own CDs, wasn't terribly good, and they have deteriorated, which means the sound quality is quite poor in this. It gets worse actually as the track goes on, but the beginning of it is kind of listenable. And it gives you an idea of how busy the track was before this original. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but yeah, so have a listen. This is what it originally sounded like when I did a first mix of this. There's quite a bit of crackling going on. That's the CD that deteriorated, a bit like an old record player, to be honest, nowadays. But it's quite busy. You can hear that vibraphone part on the top, which really isn't there anymore. And the tempo, as you can hear, is much faster if you know the original track. Again, you can just about hear the glockenspiel part going on as well through that. So quite a different sound there, I think. Here's some of the original mix. I just switched the mutes over. So again, hopefully you're familiar with this track, but this is what it now sounds like, which we are much more familiar with. Much slower tempo, much smoother sound overall. Have a listen. Okay, so yes, interesting. As you can hear, that was much faster tempo, brighter sound, very different kind of sound and feel to it. So I sent that in to the publishers along with a few other ones, and that track, they said, "Oh no, that's no good. It's too fast. It's too busy. It's too tinkly, and so on." And obviously I agreed with that, but that was interesting. Immediately feedback we got from that. So I changed it and I slowed it right down. Down to 57 BPM. It's probably about 70 or 80 something to start with. And the mallet part, known as the warm mallet part, I'll just play you that again. So this part that I played you, of course, isn't played there at all. It's played right down here. It's actually a whole octave lower. So it's that warm mallet sound, as it's called, that plays at the beginning. So I just put the whole thing down an octave so it wasn't quite so high pitched, and slowed the whole thing down, and it began to work much better as a piece. So yeah, that's how that got put together. Other parts, of course, that got added were the bass drum and claves, very simple sort of heartbeat, boom, boom, kind of heartbeat rhythm going with a bit of a clave, just to give a little bit of a beat to it, something sort of in the higher pitch just to balance that sound out. And then the underlying sort of piano part that I was talking about, which goes kind of quite randomly. I don't know how it goes, but it's very, very busy and random, sort of pokes the odd note out in there, which filled it up a little bit more. And then finally we had a string pad that went on the top, which did very little at all. In fact, it really just held sort of notes down just for long periods of time, just sort of across the top. You can hear the sort of sheen of string pad going across the top the whole way through. I just had a look at the original music again, and it does move occasionally when the harmonies change, but very much it just plays a whole C major pad the whole time. Just giving again this constant for the ear to fix on, so that you can really go into that zone of hypnosis, I suppose we're talking about, in order to get this sort of sleep going. So that's it really. I thought I'd talk about that piece because it's one of the most listened to pieces I have. I thought it might be interesting just to analyse it again and look over it. So minimalist in style, doesn't move away from a C major scale at all. Very repetitive underneath, but then sort of the movement of the vocal part gives a little bit of sort of dynamic and flow to it, up and down, but always just coming back to that sort of C major feel the whole way through. And then finally we added the sort of woodland forest sound effects on. This was again a request by the publishers. I like it actually, it sounds really nice, and it gives the track a sort of instant feel of being somewhere else rather than just at home, unless you happen to live in a forest. Then the idea of having sort of trees and nature and sort of insects, whatever, buzzing around you was kind of nice, just to take you sort of somewhere else, far away. So yeah, that was added on at the end and mixed in, and I think sounds really nice as part of it, fades in and out with the track. And that was it, the end of my little video today about After the Rain. Thanks for watching, bye bye.